think people will disagree with me. I don't express my opinion.
So if you pick and
So, I guess, yeah, absolutely, good point. I think if, just reading this sentence, which depends on the context, of course, it doesn't say anything about you having a bad opinion. So we'll assume that your opinion is somewhat valid. And the reason why you're not expressing it is not because you think you have a bad opinion, it's because you think people will disagree. That's the reason you're not expressing it. And Gracie, where would you put it? Say a little bit social management. I'd also say a little bit emotional management. Are you going to be able to overcome this little, insult or somebody disagreeing with you? Is that sort of setback going to put you in a tailspin? If you're able to manage those emotions going into that conversation, I would say emotional management would be a strong component. I also agree, though, social management is a factor there. Jinfu?
I think it has to be a high EQ, I think, because it depends on.
It is a high EQ?
I think it can be high EQ, depends on the context, because it depends on what kind of object you want to have when you try to express your opinion. For example, if you're trying to engage with people because you want to gain their trust, probably you don't have to express your opinion based on your.
Okay. Yeah. Your goal is to gain their trust. Your goal is not necessarily to get them to agree with your opinion. I could agree with that argument.
What about understanding a situation, like based on a situation, like if you are in a different community or if they are actually going to disagree, even if you give the most rational thoughts, so you just say, okay, I keep my thoughts back.
Okay. Yeah, I could agree with that as well. Good social awareness, good social understanding, good emotional management. All right, so I'm right here, but I understand the context in the community or the professional working relationship or the culture, so I'm going to be able to manage my emotions, and I don't have to tell you that I'm right. But if we don't read any further into the question, we still want to be able to express our opinions, even though people are going to disagree with us. We want to have that skill. Obviously, there are other contexts when we need to be careful. I practice activities that help me understand my feelings, such as keeping a diary, talking with friends, etc. Great. Yeah. I find it hard to be patient. Carrie.
So this can be, I think this can be emotional and self-awareness.
Owen?
What did you say?
He said emotional and self-awareness. He's on the fence.
I think it's
Or both.
emotional management.
I think emotional management.
Yeah.
All right, if these little setbacks are going to make you lose your patience, I'm going to say you have low emotional management skills.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into some techniques we can use to have high EQ. But before we do that, let me talk about the thing that Daniel Goleman thinks is the primary enemy of high emotional intelligence. What he calls the emotional hijack. This is none other than the fight, flight, or freeze response that we experience when we get scared. Question I have for you all: when is this response good? When is this response bad? When is it good? Mo.
When you're in a stressful situation and you may need to react quickly.
Okay, so I agree with the second part. I don't necessarily agree with the first part. When you need to react quickly, it might be good. I would say when your life is in danger, this is a good response to have. But that's the only time this is a good response to have. Just because you're in a stressful situation doesn't mean you need to go into a fight or flight response. Maybe you could be in a job interview, which would be a stressful situation. Do you want to go into fight or flight in that situation? No. So most of the time, I don't know, 99% of the time, this hurts us because our life is in danger rarely. Fortunately, we don't live in a society where people throw spears at us or tigers chase us. We don't have life-threatening situations come up that much. But what happens when we go into this, of course, adrenaline goes through our body, oxygen is utilized for this response. We find it hard to talk because the oxygen is going from the blood to the muscles thing. The amygdala, which we'll talk about in a minute, a part of our brain, compromises our working memory. We can't think of multiple situations as easily because we're so focused on the one thing that seems to pose a threat to our safety. Duration varies, and we'll talk about this in a minute. I want to give you a picture of this, talk a little bit about what happens inside your brain when you're going through this emotional hijack. Suppose you are this hiker dude walking along the woods, nice fall day, you've got your little coat on. You see a snake. Think about what happens in your brain. You see this scary looking snake, your eyes bulge out. This information goes to a part of your brain called the visual thalamus, which translates that snake into a picture of a snake in your mind. Then it goes through your cerebral cortex, which processes that. The cerebral part of our brain, the brainy part of our brain, the part where we think, it's called cerebral. We sometimes think cerebral and brain are interchangeable, but there's actually a brain part of our brain where we process this information. We say, okay, this is a snake. The best thing to do is to slowly walk back. Maybe there's another best thing to do, but you process that in the rational part of your brain. You send that message to a processing center called the amygdala, which translates that down the spinal cord to the muscles that actually slowly walk back. Now, the problem, do you see this little dotted line here from the visual thalamus to the amygdala? What's going on here today?
We skip the thinking stage.
We skip the thinking stage, exactly. So this amygdala, has anyone ever heard the term the lizard part of our brain? All right, that's the primal, the early development part of our brain, where we just responded to dangerous things. We acted without thinking of it. So the lizard part of my brain took control and made me run really fast. So what happens is this amygdala, if this part of your brain thinks you're in danger, has the ability to hijack this rational thought process. If you're in danger, it says, I am going to send a signal down the spinal cord to run like hell before you have a chance to think about it. And this is good in what situations? When your life is in danger. How often is your life in danger? I hope none of you are constantly facing life-threatening situations, but rarely is your life actually in danger. And we need to think about how we can control this, manage this. A couple notes on duration, how long this lasts. Initially, there will be some sort of threat, something you're interpreting as a threat. You will be in this heightened fight, flight, or freeze reaction until that threat is resolved, or till you realize that it's not a life-threatening situation. After that threat is resolved, your compromised working memory, or the fact I mentioned earlier that your working memory is compromised, it's harder for you to think about multiple variables and how they fit together because you're so focused on one. That effect, according to the Institute for Health and Human Potential, lasts 18 minutes, unchecked. Once that's over, there is a physical toxicity in your body with all this adrenaline that lasts 3 to 4 hours. So, I need to go to a bar and have a drink because I'm just so stressed out. I still have all this adrenaline pumping through my body. That effect, if you don't do anything about it, can last 3 or 4 hours. And there's one thing I added that I didn't put on your slide. It's the emotional distress. Because I like saying things last forever. Could last forever. Suppose you see a snake years later. You have an irrational reaction to that snake, even though it's in a cage. Or somebody tells you about a pet snake they have. Well, I never want to be friends with that person. Maybe that's rational. Let me think of an irrational example. I don't want to go to Florida because they have snakes there, even though you're going to be living in a condo on the 17th floor. Right? That's irrational to have that fear forever. So how can we improve our emotional intelligence? A number of ways. Analysis, like we're doing now, going through that list, thinking about how we would fit this into a category of emotional intelligence. Techniques. I'm going to teach you a few techniques. And then we're going to practice. We're going to practice some difficult conversations. We're going to practice some interacting. And we're going to use these techniques. The very first technique I want to teach you is how we can deal with an emotional hijack. As you know, I like acronyms. They're all the same letter. I have a triple B method for dealing with emotional hijack. And yes, they do all start with B. Break the pattern, buy time, build context. So, you're experiencing an emotional hijack. Now, first thing, your life is not actually in danger. That's what we'll call an emotional hijack. But you're thinking irrationally for some reason because you think it is, or the lizard part of your brain thinks it is. First thing, stop. Break the pattern. Take a deep breath. Get that oxygen, adrenaline thing slowed down in your body. Stop whatever reaction is happening irrationally. If you're running away from the snake, then you should be walking slowly away from the snake. Slow down. Buy time. Take time. I forgot what I was going to say next. And I'm not going to just jump and say something silly. I'm going to stop for a minute. I'm going to pause. I think someone in this class was giving a presentation in the first presentation we did, and I think it was Siddharth, who said, in the middle of this presentation, he said, I have no idea what I'm going to say next. And that was long enough for him to remember what he needed to say next. So he could have just taken a breath and then remembered what he wanted to say next. Ask for time, avoid commitments. Most common thing I said when I was a new manager, well, not the most common thing, but one thing I said commonly, is let me think about this, and I'll get back to you. This is a stressful situation. I'm not going to make a decision right now. Let me think about this. Take a breath. Wait at least until the 18 minutes is over. Preferably until the 3 to 4 hours is over. Build context. So remember we said the only time this emotional hijack, fight or flight response is good is if our life is in danger. We need to think about the context. Is this a life or death context? No, it's not. It's a job interview. Engage that cerebral thinking. A couple things you can do to engage that cerebral thinking. I've used this one before. Count backwards from 100 by 3. Just forces you to slow down for a minute. Okay. 100, 97, 94, 91. It's not too challenging, but just gets you into cerebral thinking. Ask questions. Is this a life or death situation? Is this something that I need to think of in a different way? What's really going on here that's making me stressed out? Determine if there is a threat, or if you're just overreacting. Any questions on this? Sure.
Can you count forwards as well, or is it better to count backwards?
Well, you can, sure. And if you develop something that works well for you, that's absolutely fine. The reason I like this is it just makes you, okay, fine. I'm not going to panic for a second because I have to think 97, 94, 91, 88. It's just a small challenge. What I want to do for a minute now is do some quick self-awareness work. This is the type of thing, if I just send you home with it, maybe you'll do a little bit of it, maybe you won't. Let's take 10 minutes at each of these little sections to come up with some ideas of where we might have gone into an emotional hijack situation, so we can add that to our discussion of how we might develop higher EQ. So for this self-assessment worksheet, Emotional Intelligence Session 1 workbook, we already did the worst, best attributes. I'm going to, in a moment, have you turn to page 3 and think about past events that triggered an emotional hijack for you. I'm going to do that in a minute, but first I'm going to draw your attention to page 2, which is your professional goal worksheet. Now, we've already talked about goals. You should already have a context and understanding of what your goals are. The reason I mention that is because we want to think about your emotional hijack situations and your EQ in the context of achieving those goals. In what ways did this emotional hijack prevent you from achieving your goals? And how would correcting it help you achieve those goals? Just the same way I talked about how what Daniel Goleman did was by what he did get caught on in the business world was focusing on job effectiveness. He wanted to see how we could use this touchy-feely stuff to accomplish an effective job, do a good job. We want to think about how we can use this emotional intelligence stuff to achieve our goals. So if you want to jot down, remind yourself what your 2, 5, and 10-year goals are, that's fine. But I'm going to give you about 5 or 10 minutes to think of 3 events that triggered an emotional hijack. And you're going to answer, first you're going to name the event. What was that time so-and-so said I was fat? Or was that time when someone said my team wasn't doing a good job? And then you're going to ask me these 3 questions. First, any threat to your actual physical well-being? Now I'll tell you, the answer to that question is going to be no. Because if there was a threat to your physical well-being, then that's a different situation. I just put that there to remind you that this was a reaction that may not have been helpful. Now, just because there was no actual physical threat, there was probably something that scared you, something that threatened you. And I'd like you to think about what category of threat this was. Was this a professional threat? Were you threatened financially? Were you worried about losing your social status? Was there something else? And if possible, can you broadly describe the category of that event? Was this a manager discussion? Was this a deadline? Social interaction, some sort of conflict. So when you do these 3, we'll think about how we can group them and see what sort of patterns you might have and how we can overcome these emotional hijacks. Does anyone have any questions? Karen?
What about if you actually physically threaten them?
Yeah, then that's not an emotional hijack. That is, then I'm glad that you had a fight or flight response in that situation, and I hope it served you well to get away fast or elbow somebody fast. So don't use that one as an example. So we'll just take 2, 3, 5 minutes. We'll figure it out. Just to put this in a context for us. couple more minutes, we're ready to start discussing. Finish up in 1 minute or so. So let's hear some of these examples. If you could, just tell us this past event in 1 sentence or less. Then tell us in which way you felt threatened. And if you could broadly describe this category of events. Tell us about that, Blake.
So I was ready to go home one day at a consulting assignment. At the end of the day, on my way out, Paul tells me it's my last day.
Oh, okay. All right. And what way did you feel threatened?
So I felt that I felt angry at first because I thought it was going to cause an employment gap if I don't find a job soon.
Okay.
And the other worry is what if I don't pay all my bills?
Okay, so threatened professionally and financially.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, and I guess broad category of event. Hopefully this is not something that happens a lot.
No, it's a one-time thing.
One-time event, but could you define it in a broad category?
Manager discussion.
I think it's more than a manager discussion. Let's come back to that, because what I want to do is think about how we can put these in certain categories and buckets and say, this is the type of interaction that causes an emotional hijack. So we'll make a mental note and come back. Jim?
And a coworker sending me an email for job postings at other companies.
Okay. In what way did you feel threatened?
I guess kind of professionally, because it was like why I feel like I enjoy my job now. I feel like I'm doing a good job while I was just sending me
Okay.
job postings.
Okay, so professional.
It's happened a few times too. It's kind of weird.
Okay, another job posting. Okay, and how would you start to quantify this in terms of maybe a broad category?
I would say it's a social and professional interaction.
Okay. Yes. It is. Yeah, 'cause there might be a social aspect of people not like me. They want to get me to another job. Is that why they're sending me this? Maybe. All right. So it could be both, and we might need to think. What is it? Is it you're afraid that your social position is threatened, or you're afraid your professional position is threatened? So the broad category could be both. Josie.
So when I was working towards my PhD, there was a time when it seemed that the whole project that I was working for 3 years shut down. And it was because there was a publication from MIT here, and their publication was saying that the whole hypothesis that I was working on was not correct.
Okay. So wait, it had to be shut down because the hypothesis you were working on?
Yeah, the initial hypothesis, because in scientific world generally you start working with the hypothesis, it's not a problem, but then you do the hypothesis that, okay, this could be the possibility.
Okay, so someone told you your hypothesis was incorrect. Is
It
that
was not someone, like, it was a valid publication in the journal
okay?
that was talking that the whole hypothesis that I was working on was not correct.
Oh, okay. So you're all right. So you're doing your PhD research, and you open up this article that says the thing you're working on is all completely wrong. Okay, and right, and keep going.
So this was the time where I really
You could,
felt,
so how could we want to quantify this? In what way did you feel threatened? So we can think about putting a concrete label on this. And then the next question is, can you broadly describe the category of event?
I felt threatened professionally.
Good.
Because I was working on it for all.
Good. I said good.
And the broad category is, I would say, manager discussion. I don't know where to put it exactly.
Okay. Professional threats. like there's a whole nother category though. This is like a self-esteem, professional self-esteem, professional worth. Maybe like an attack on professional worth. Okay, good. All right, who else? Harper.
So the event was a performance.
A performance review? Okay.
So it's professionally threatened.
Okay.
And category event was managed.
Manager discussion? Okay. When did you feel threatened? Is this something that happened during this discussion that put you in an emotional hijack?
It was unplanned. It was an unplanned performance.
Okay. Oh, okay. Can you come into my office? I'd like to do a performance review. Okay. What happened? You felt your heart start beating?
Yeah.
Okay. How did you make it through that situation?
I calmed down once he started talking. It was
Okay.
more positive.
Okay. Good. Okay. So good thing to be aware of. All right. When I hear this, I need an impromptu performance review. My heart's going to start beating. How can I deal with it? Okay. Good. What else? Care.
More personal.
Sure.
Very
That
embarrassing.
sometimes make better one. Embarrassing. Okay.
I went to an all boys high school,
Mhm.
and the first time I asked to go out, I got rejected.
Okay. Good.
So this is obviously social, and it's a social interaction. I don't know.
Okay, you're threatened socially, and
Yeah.
this was I call it a romantic interaction. Okay, so I think that one fits better into these labels I'm trying to encourage you to think about. So this was the situation, was threatening socially, and this was a romantic interaction. Good. I'm sure she regrets it now. Anybody else? Mike?
I was put in a situation because my colleague couldn't get to see his client. So my manager said, "I'm going to go sit in front of two executives, and you're gonna do the training." Now it was just basic training, but apparently it was miscommunication. So I was sitting in front of two executives. They're looking for financial reporting and of a system that I really don't know. So I was put into a place almost like I felt like I got thrown under a bus. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. Something like that. I'm like, I just kind of like, geez. And I basically then I just said, look, this is what I know. My manager put me there, and I did the best I can to show you. But I was like, oh.
Okay, good example. I want to ask you what happened, but first, you can flatter me by putting it into those broad categories. In what way did you feel threatened? And how was the broad
Well, I
category?
felt threatened because I felt useless. Like, I felt like I was,
Socially useless, professionally useless, professionally useless,
yeah.
professionally threatened, and broad category. I might help you out here. I might suggest that it is a situation you're unprepared for. So that's information. So you know situations where you're unprepared for, you don't respond to effectively. So how can you manage that? How can you avoid making irrational mistakes in that type of environment?
But it was a bad part of the manager.
Yeah, you can tell your manager that that's your strength and that's your weakness. So my strength is not being thrown into situations where I have no understanding. That's not a strength I have, and that's good information to have, right? Okay, somebody else? Jennifer?
Yeah, so I have similar to never reply my question with a sentence more than 30 words.
Okay.
So actually I'm leader. Steve is like my boss. So no matter how I try to talk with him.
I'd like to see some of those emails that when I was doing some preparing for our email, text message, social media discussion, I was trying to look for some good examples of emails that were ineffective, and I bet there were a lot that were ineffective. Never replied with more than a 3-word email.
Actually, even we trying to talk with him, but it's good. Yes, what else? Something like that. So it makes me feel frustrated.
Okay. So how did this play out? Were you frustrated when you were actually having a one-on-one conversation with him? When you were sitting at your computer?
Yeah.
Tell me about one of those times you went into this emotional hijack.
I just don't know how to. The first time, I just don't know how to continue our conversation.
Blinded by rage?
Yeah. I was just afraid.
Okay, I can tell that about you. I would suspect you're the kind of guy who gets blinded by rage. Alright, good. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is take this information and think about times, professional environments that might make us feel nervous. What did I have? The next two, potentially dangerous environment, potentially dangerous relationship. So you've identified some ways that you might feel threatened. You put that into a broad category, socially, professionally, management discussions, performance reviews, romantic situations. And think about potentially dangerous relationships, potentially dangerous situations. What relationships might put us in an emotional hijack that we need to be aware of? What situations put us into a potentially dangerous emotional hijack type of situation? Michael mentioned one, being thrown into an environment where you don't have the necessary information, the necessary background. Honestly, that doesn't scare me as much as it might scare Michael. I used to be an actor. I think I can do anything. I can just improv, make it up. I used to like those situations sometimes. I'll just throw in. I'll just pretend I'm a IT person. It'll be a fun acting exercise. And I did that kind of stuff when I was in my 20s. So I wouldn't put that down. But Michael identified it as one. The question is, which of these could you quantify that way? And when you think of these potentially dangerous relationships, you want to think about a few things, I suggest. One, your behavioral limitations. How does it affect your behavior? What are you limited in doing? You're not able to think rationally. You're not able to speak on your own behalf as effectively as you'd like during a performance review when you're nervous. You're not able to speak at all when you get thrown in a situation where you don't have the right background. I'd like you to think about some early warning signs with these types of situations. Heart starts beating, hands start shaking, start worrying about this past experience or that past experience. And most importantly of all, your positive actions. What should you do about it? So you might have identified a performance review as a potentially dangerous situation. So I want you to think about how that affects your behavior. Maybe it's impossible for you to ask for more money in that situation. Maybe it's impossible for you to sing your own praises in that situation. Maybe you get into a job interview situation where it's almost impossible for you to talk yourself up. Does anyone have that experience? Yeah, it's just, you're nervous. When I'm scared like that, I can't sing my own good qualities. I just focus on my bad qualities and apologizing for those. So, think about how you could put these in potentially dangerous relationships, potentially dangerous environments. Think about what behavior is limited, and then the two components of what are your early warning signs to let you know this is happening. And most importantly of all, what you could potentially do about it. Any questions? So try to take these three emotional hijack situations that you just wrote down and see if you can fit those into a type of relationship that makes you nervous or a type of business environment that makes you nervous.
Did you say the ones that we just wrote down or using them?
Yes, use those same ones. If you think of another one, that's fine. If you thought of something else while we were discussing, if someone else might have mentioned something, absolutely, you can quantify them those in that area. Yes.
Can you tell me again what was behavioral limitations again?
What are you prevented from doing because you're in panic?
Oh, okay.
And that might be thinking rationally, and that might be asking for money. That might be, I'll just use the example of the job interview, that might be singing your own praises. You just can't do that when you get nervous. You just have to focus on your needs.
Would you say positive actions were?
What do you shoot about? What should you do? Maybe
That's almost
It's fine.
Like, you see me? Like, yeah, this is emotionally
So what do you palpitation, that's fine. Palpitation, breathe, fine. Good. All right. So we're at a point where we've got something useful potential. We've thought about emotional intelligence. We've thought about how it affects us. We've thought about times we've gone into an emotional chat. And now we're at a point where we can say, this is a professional situation that is dangerous for me, and this is what I should do about it. And we can say this is a professional relationship or a type of relationship that is dangerous for me. This is what happens to me, and this is what I should do about it. So who's got something for us? Jim.
I think potential is a good environment to be feeling not being respected.
Okay.
And here let me just
Okay. All right. Good. And I would say that might be a dangerous relationship or environment, just not feeling respected. It could be both a relationship and an environment. Not feeling respected. Okay. So not feeling respected is the environment / relationship. And as a result of that, you cannot continue the conversation. So what should you do instead? What should you do instead? What are the positive actions?
Positive action, I think, to focus on the without considering about whether I respect it or not, focus on goal, focus on why I'm here, what I'm going to do.
Outstanding. I like it. I like it. Okay.
So the dangerous environment is disagreement with management.
Okay.
Limitations is not being able to rationally present your thought process.
Okay.
Early warning signs is being flustered, disappointed, I guess.
Okay.
And then positive action would be to take a deep breath and think about how you should present the idea differently.
Okay. Good. Good. I like all those. What are some other positive actions our pick can take in that situation? So the dangerous environment is, it was disagreement with the boss. Just run through those things for me.
Disagreement with the boss, behavioral limitations was not being
Not being able to present yourself. Okay. Early warning was being flustered. Okay. So when you're in that environment, you feel yourself being flustered. One thing you can do is think about how you could effectively present. What else could our kid do in that situation? Like,
Go to his boss, to his boss's boss, and say, this guy under you just doesn't know his stuff, and this is what's going on.
okay, yes, you could do that. How about in that moment, though? In that panic moment, because that may be a longer process. What else could our kid do? Stephanie?
In my case, I used to do some debate for talk to my friends and share it with them.
Okay, you say, you know what? Yeah, maybe you could say, can we have this discussion in 30 minutes? Let me go collect some papers and collect some data for you, and do some listening to some music. Can I do it?
I had some success once. I took the box out and that kind of worked.
Okay.
I talked to him in like a more like leisure way.
Okay, so maybe
I
yes.
talked to him more leisure way, and then he was actually it wasn't a working environment, so he wasn't being serious.
Yes.
So that kind of built a rapport and
Yes. So one thing I would point out about that is maybe that realization is that you are not as effective in a serious business environment all the time. And one environment that is better for you is a more relaxed social environment. I think that's good knowledge from this exercise. Realizing that there are things you're able to bring to that conversation when you're able to lighten up the conversation a little bit. Maybe you may not be able to take your boss out drinking, but you may be able to find ways to lighten it up. Matt?
About just asking a question before a meeting started, like clear your mind by indirectly getting your brain ready.
Yes. You've got a question on your mind, and it needs to be asked, and you know that you're not going to be able to concentrate on anything else. One solution is recognizing that and saying, I should ask this question before we can continue. Does that make sense to everyone? And that's a good outcome from this type of analysis. You might have a certain situation that our Pitt was describing, where you know it's going to stress you out that way, and you know asking a question, what might be questions our Pitt could ask in that situation? It could be, is this a discussion about, I don't know the right way to say this, is this a discussion about my value or my team's value, or is this more a constructive discussion about whether we should be in this business? Something like that. All right, what else? Who's got a potentially dangerous situation or dangerous relationship for us? Christian?
I'm really good friends with my manager at work, so it's a potentially dangerous relationship in that I was recently promoted back in August. You don't want others to think that it's because I'm friends with the boss. So behavior limitations is just keeping it 100% professional work. Only talking, only discussing what matters. I guess early warning sign would be like any mention of like we'll want to do something, like any mention of doing something outside of work or something that has to do with out of work, or like our colleagues kind of looking at us like more than the boss.
Yeah, you know what? I'd like to discuss that a little bit. Because my first thought is that's great analysis, and that's definitely a dangerous thing that you should be aware of. But what I want you to focus on, and I think we can, by expanding that example, focus on this, what I want you to focus on is when do you go into that emotional hijack situation? So is there something about that situation when people make comments about, oh, you just got promoted, would that set off an irrational response?
Well, it was actually our manager, so like who's above her and who's technically also in a group but above her, said something to us.
Okay,
So that's why.
yes. Okay, so
She
is that something good?
She changed like the reporting lines so that I report directly to her now instead of to my manager who's the friend.
Okay, and that set off some sort of emotional hijack for you?
Yeah.
Okay. And early warning signs? That's what happened. Your heart started beating, you started sending nasty emails.
Yeah, I mean, just like I started overthinking like, well, how am I interacting at work? I don't think it was like that, but I just started overthinking everything.
Okay, okay, it's good analysis. Alright, who else has got one for us? Derek?
This is flight.
Oh, okay, so this is a good one. This isn't something provokes a panic in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Excuse me, can you repeat this, please?
yeah, missing a long distance flight. So
Oh.
one of those flights that you take from, I mean, I had this experience with me where I missed a flight from Asia to the US, and there's only one a day, and I got there, and the plane just kind of took off, panicking, I got wondering what I do, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So, early warning sign, obviously,
Let's think about this a different way.
yep,
So now when you're planning business travel,
right.
do you get nervous?
Sometimes.
Maybe because of this thing that happened where you missed a flight?
Yeah, I mean, it depends if you know, if you have like a meeting that day when you land, that has happened to me, and you missed that flight, then you are big.
Yes, yes. Okay, okay, good, good. All right, somebody else have an example for us? Matt?
How about, I mean, I have more of like, well, it's a social one.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Like a group of friends that I
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
So they're like, best way to put it, I guess, is like they're like the pretty girls from high school, right?
Okay.
So like alone, they're great people. Together, they're a bunch of like, I don't know,
Okay.
So it's like, so every time we go out, like somebody's gonna get into a fight. It's come to that point. So it's some reason there's like somebody's being yoked up by a bouncer and just being escorted to the front, and eventually all of us have to follow, and then like you just have to be ready because somebody's gonna throw a jab somewhere. So it's like that's my situation. Like I'm not like that. I'm like obviously if you're done wrong, and stand your ground, but like they actually proceed. So it's like anyway. So it's come to the point where my going out with them is like the limitation now. So it's like, because I have too much to lose to be put in that situation. So I'm like, I do not want to be I want to be associated with them because individually they're great people. I love them. But like when we all go out together in like these environments, like on occasions, I'm like, no, let me not do this right now.
Okay. Okay, so maybe the potentially dangerous dangerous environment, dangerous relationship.
Yeah, I don't know if I related it correctly, but it's like from now on, every time they say we're gonna go out for an occasion, like somebody's birthday, like I know I have to go because like I really like the guy. But like in the back of my mind, I'm like, here we go. Like,
Here we go. It's kind of handy with me face down and some bouncer,
yeah,
the Jersey X. Okay, good. Let's come back. We may come back to that one, but let me just get some other ideas. Alicia.
Alright, so mine's, again, not professional either, but it's pretty straightforward. So my dangerous, situation is when anybody has a conversation about somebody, dying. So, behavioral limitations, I freeze. I can't talk about it, or I flight, I walk away. It's just uncomfortable to be in the situation. And then early warning signs, again, freezing up, just not being comfortable with the conversation at all. And then positive actions, I just have to stop and think and realize that the person probably doesn't know why I'm uncomfortable with it. And then just take a step back and just listen to them, be empathetic about it, and freak out and run away.
Okay, good, good. So this is,
Pretty straightforward.
this is good analysis. And I realize these types of things don't always neatly fit in these categories, but this is an example of one that does. It's a type of conversation that freaks her out. And as a result, she might act in a way that's somewhat irrational and that might be destructive to future relationships. So she knows the early warning signs, and now that she's thought about it, she knows some positive actions that she should do instead. And that's the takeaway for this assignment, for this exercise that we just went through. It's what are those types of situations that put us into this emotional hijack? How do we know what's happening? What should we do about it? Does that make sense? So with that, does anyone want to add one more, or maybe rephrase something that you've said previously and say, oh, this is how I should look at it instead? Okay.
So I'll talk about performance.
Yes.
So potentially dangerous environment is impromptu. Behavioral limitations, not thinking clearly, early warning signs of nervousness. Then positive action is not jumping to conclusions, taking a deep breath.
Yeah, not jumping to conclusions, taking a deep breath. Don't be like Siddharth and say, I have no idea what to say. Take a deep breath instead. Okay. That's the type of analysis that I want you to come to for this. You want to finish this off, Michael?
Yeah. I'm gonna go back to the same situation where I wasn't had to explain something.
Okay, so
For the dangerous situation would be my image or the company's image.
Okay, when your image or the company's image is threatened, that's the dangerous situation.
Right.
Okay, good.
That would be it. Behavioral limitations, I would have to just have to, and I would have to pull back from my.
Okay, behavioral limitations though. You actually mentioned one when I was walking around.
Yes.
And this is a really good one. I'll summarize for you.
Go ahead.
And then I'll give it back to you. He said his first reaction in that situation where he is threatened because he doesn't understand what he's supposed to be talking about, one of his first reactions is to say bad things about his boss. I would call that a dangerous behavioral limitation. That's a reaction you have when you're in that situation. So now that he's done this analysis, he can think about what to do instead, which are what? Positive actions.
Would be rethink, act in a professional manner, explain the situation, and be truthful, and at the end it all ended out okay.
Yeah.
And there was one positive thing. He had his own personal program that I knew well, so I was able to fix his own personal program, so I came out.
Yes, I like a lot of components about that. Rethink, tell the truth, and say, I don't realize what I'm supposed to be talking about here. Now that may seem obvious when we do this in a classroom, but think about how it might be tempting to just make something up under the pressure. Oh, I don't know what the answer is. I'm going to look professionally incompetent if I don't have an answer, so I'm going to just think of something. Anyone realize or agree with me that that might be a potential temptation? So, thinking about it in this context, don't do that. Other thing he did is he looked on the bright side. He said, I cannot answer this question, but there is another program I can help you. Let me do that. Okay, so that's some work on self-awareness. We've gone through some times you go into an emotional hijack. You've thought about types of situations that put you in that emotional hijack. You've thought about how that affects your behavior in an irrational way and what you should do about it. Good self-awareness, that's also important to emotional management. The work you've just done is going to help us think about emotional management. Self-awareness being key. What are those emotional triggers? What professional and social situations make us nervous? What types of relationships put us on edge? Early warning signs, how behavior is limited, what you should do. What you should do to avoid this emotional hijack. You've just done some good thinking about things you can do to avoid an emotional hijack. Not only an emotional hijack in the moment, but what I might call a longer-term emotional hijack. Remember, I used the example that sometimes when we are emotionally disturbed because of something that happened that caused us distress, we make irrational decisions based on that for potentially years after. And we don't want to do that either. We want to think about why we're doing it and why it doesn't make sense that we should never ask someone in that, marketing department for help anymore just because 6 years ago somebody gave us attitude and made us feel bad. This brings us to improving the third trifecta, social management. A couple things I want to say about social management. How do we improve empathy? So we've got these three. Remember I had these three things: empathy, diagnostic insight, and skill to connect. So how can we improve those? I'm going to suggest empathy. And what is empathy again? Someone remind us. Empathy is feel someone else's pain. Yeah, Ricky said it. To feel someone else's pain. So how do we do that? How do we learn to feel someone else's pain? Great. Listen to them. Yeah. And we all have the ability to feel empathy. As humans, we feel it. We can look across the room, we can see a rock fall on somebody's shoulder, and we can wince with pain. We can put ourselves in their shoes emotionally and understand the pain they're going through. We just need to listen and think about it. Analysis, practice, diagnostic insight. How do we figure out if someone's having a bad day? How do we figure out if someone's angry? How do we figure out if someone might be jealous and why that's harming the relationship? I would say the same thing. Analysis and practice. Think about it. And we'll have an opportunity to think about some of those situations with the difficult scenarios we'll go over next time. You might have had a chance to think about some of those situations with the self and awareness you just did. Skill to connect. So how do we use this information that we have about how someone might be feeling, combined with the empathy we feel because we've thought about it and understand it? How do we use that to create a positive connection with the person? We need to analyze and practice.